It's my feel-good breakfast show.
Welcome back to your Feel Good Breakfast Show. It is a wonderful Tuesday, and it's also a relationship Tuesday on your Feel Good Breakfast Show this morning, where we delve into various relationship dynamics. Spicy. In all families, big or small, there are bound to be feuds and some forms of passive aggression. But to what extent are feuds and passive aggression healthy? That is the question we want to answer this morning. Is it right for some people to shy away from some confrontation? What is the parent's role in all of this? Very important as well. Now, here with us this morning, and hopefully got all the answers as well, we have psychologist Thomas Geffen to help us out just a little bit. Thomas, welcome to the show, man. Lovely to have you.
Thanks for having me.
Sure, we were just speaking off air now. It's such a broad topic because there's so many factors that influence family dynamics and a little bit of tension in there, background, culture, where you come from. And I'm hoping we're going to just pass on some knowledge this morning, but I want to talk about those terms: gaslighting, passive-aggressive. How would you define these two terms looking at that family space?
Absolutely, and I mean, gaslighting is really one that we're just getting so much now, and people are using this term, but what exactly does it mean? It's not always clear. So with gaslighting, it's really when someone is trying to undermine your reality. They're really, in quite a significant way, questioning your reality. It might be subtle and happening over time, but you're starting to wonder, how is it that, they always seem to, make me out to be the bad guy, or they always seem to, really think that I do this, or I'm, something really is being questioned fundamentally. Yeah. So it can be quite, it can really have quite a negative impact on a relationship. And then moving over to passive-aggressive behavior. So, I mean, it's helpful just to break down these words. So the passive side of things, I mean, that would be something, it's a really kind of indirect form of communication. It's subtle, it's just under the table there. You're not really sure.
Like a jab.
It's like a jab, and then you're questioning what happened there. But it is actually aggressive, and that is the key thing. It's really intended, whether someone is very conscious of it or less conscious, but it's really intending to kind of hurt someone or cause them some distress.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, that passive aggressiveness, I mean, where it comes from or where it stems from, I mean, that is also the big question here, but we're going to focus on that a little bit later. We know that within families, there's always tension. Like we've mentioned, yes. I mean, people have got different personalities, and, the way that people grew up and then thrown in together in the same pot, it causes that tension. But is it healthy for families to have a little bit of tension, and to what extent before it becomes essentially damaging? Absolutely,
and it's such a good question because every family is different, and so what might be healthy in one family could be very unhealthy for another family, and so I think there is quite a spectrum with this. So on the one hand, feuds that really last, weeks and months, and there's consistent fighting, that can really, really be damaging to a family system. But I do believe that some degree of conflict is quite healthy.
Yeah.
And the reason I say that is because, it shows in a family that there can be a safe space. One can express feelings, we can disagree, but still respect each other. And then on the other hand, I think, families which have almost no conflict, what you might find is, what might be happening in that family? Is it that one person is dominating a family and no one is allowed to say anything?
Then you walk around with those internal anger.
Absolutely. Yeah. So a family should be a space where you can express feelings, you can maybe argue, you can bicker a little bit, but ultimately it's a space where that gets sorted out, it gets addressed, you learn about yourself, you learn about, each other, and then you move forward,
And you want to do it in a way that you resolve those issues in a positive way.
Absolutely.
I mean, when we talk about passive aggressiveness, it can be very damaging. In what way would you say that it can be damaging if it's not addressed properly within a family dynamic? Where can it lead?
Absolutely. I mean, it really is, the fact that it is so hidden. And so I think where it can lead to is, really long-lasting kind of, breakdown of relationships, further down the line. I think, for the person who's on the receiving end of this behavior, they might start to question, what is it that they're doing wrong, or they themselves might start to become very frustrated. So, that is the one thing, is that a passive-aggressive behavior, although it is an angry behavior, it often leaves the other person feeling angry because, you know, it's done in such an indirect way, you know, it's just a little bit sideways. And so then the person receiving this can actually become very angry. And they then might kind of, you know, really blow up and get very frustrated. And that can really lead to quite a breakdown in relationships.
And especially if the person on the receiving end of passive aggressiveness doesn't really understand, you know, the passive aggression that, you know, where it's coming from. I mean, that itself can be very, very damaging, because that just causes the pot to boil completely. Now, when it comes to, if you take a look at a family aspect, you get the parents, you get the kids. In your opinion, what is the more difficult one to deal with? You have a passive aggressive child or a passive aggressive parent?
Such a great question. And, you know, I really think it would be the passive-aggressive parent. And the reason why is that children learn from their parents. And so if you
model
have...
that behavior.
Model that behavior, right? And it's kind of the thing of, you know, do what I say and not what I do. But for children, they're going to do what you do and not what you say.
Yeah, exactly.
And, you know, then a child is also then ultimately going to become passive-aggressive or have difficulty with communication. So, you know, I think really a parent who is passive-aggressive really can be quite harmful to a child. They're still learning to communicate. They're still learning a lot about their world, especially with a young child. You know, they are really trying to engage and understand the world, understand feelings, and then to get a kind of passive-aggressive behavior from a parent might really leave them feeling very confused, very overwhelmed, but not understanding why.
Exactly, and I mean, if you don't deal with it, I mean, imagine the roadmap for that child going forward and their relationships outside and their workplace. So we're going to delve into that a little bit deeper. Thomas, thank you very much, man. Very insightful this morning. We want to know how do you deal with conflict in a family situation? What is your go-to? How do you resolve it? Is it the fight or flight that kick in? Comment on our social media post on Facebook and let us know. We'd love to hear from you. Our number 063 408 8863. We'll be back with Thomas in just a bit.
It's my feel-good breakfast show.
Welcome back to your Feel Good Breakfast Show on this chilly Tuesday. It is a Relationship Tuesday on your Feel Good Breakfast Show this morning, and we are delving into various relationship dynamics this morning. Very spicy. Now, we know this. No family is absolutely 100% perfect. Personalities clash. Arguments are inevitable, and not everyone will be the biggest advocate for confrontation at first, that is. But family is all about how we handle and overcome these hurdles. We're back with psychologist Thomas Geffen to discuss this rather interesting topic further. Thomas, welcome back. We unpacked a little bit about passive aggressiveness, what that means, gaslighting as well. And we also spoke about, I think, you know, how it can affect a child and parents. It's such a complicated one because we were just speaking off air. It's not always that somebody will realize that they're acting in a passive aggressive manner. But if you take a look at maybe parents and who's got young children and one of the parents are of a passive-aggressive nature, how does that then essentially impact the children? Because we spoke about the fact that, you know, children loves modeling behavior.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that really is the key thing. So, you know, for every child, it may look different. So that is important to really think about. But one of the things that passive-aggressive behavior does is it can really leave a child, especially, you know, questioning what have they done wrong. And with it being passive-aggressive, you know, it's really unclear. The child isn't sure what they've done wrong, but it can also leave them feeling really angry. And, you know, passive-aggressive behavior is often very hidden, and so it really projects the anger that maybe a parent feels, but it projects it into the child. And the child then may really feel, you know, they've really done something wrong or might feel quite worthless even. Exactly.
And if you take a look and taking, from a point of, I mean, a child from an emotional challenge point of view, there's no way that they can pick up from those cues that the parent, they can only go on what they see and hear.
Absolutely. You know, and children aren't born with the sense of what is normal behavior, what is appropriate communication. They go by what they learn. And so if they see a certain style of communication, a certain style of behavior in the home, they see this as normal. They don't say, oh, my parents aren't communicating in a good way, or they, acting really aggressively, but they just see this as this is how people behave and this is what I should expect from the world.
And I mean, that will then flow through if you have siblings in the house one child picks up that passive-aggressive behavior. And we know that siblings normally lean on each other for support. They're there. I mean, the brother, sister, brother, whatever the case may be. But how can that kind of impact the relationship with regards to the siblings and moving that forward and growing? And, you know, we want a flourishing relationship with our kids, that's for sure.
Absolutely, and it really can undermine the relationship, and it can undermine it even right into adulthood as well. So if parents are passive-aggressive, if there's a really problematic style of communication and conflict resolution, that might play out in a sibling relationship. So, I mean, one example we could think about is, children do sometimes like to compete, and especially siblings, and they might, not be feeling very secure about their position in a family. And so, passive-aggressive behavior in the sibling relationship can be used to undermine one of the siblings. And so, one of the children might really start to use behaviors to make another child look bad or to kind of feel a little bit better than them. And that can really lead to kind of a very unhealthy family relationship.
Yeah. And I mean, this is where it becomes difficult for parents, dealing with siblings, because now who did what? Who's the one in the right? Who's the one that's really being affected by all of this?
Absolutely.
You were speaking about, the fact that obviously it can cause a lot of issues for a child that, picks up passive-aggressive behavior into later adulthood. But at what point, I mean, is there a way or a timeline, that we can say, like, listen, this is now becoming a real problem if a child is exposed to that kind of behavior from a young age?
Sure. I mean, definitely. I think children are capable of really a lot of change and a lot of growth. And so I think, children are learning to communicate. So, especially, your nonverbal communication is going to really be developing within those first 5 to 6 years. And, that's a really key area. But even beyond that, children have incredible capacity to change and to grow. So, once they get kind of into that primary school phase, I think they can still learn a lot. And at the same time, it's even possible for adults who, have grown up in, this kind of a family to really start to work on themselves as well and to kind of think, okay, maybe I have grown up and developed quite a problematic style of communicating my feelings and expressing myself. How is it that I can really work on this?
And this is why it's so important to, I think, to foster those correct ways of dealing with kind of issues within the family from an early age, because we know that unlearning a habit becomes very, very difficult. I want to quickly chat about active aggression and passive aggression, because we've spoken a lot about active aggression. I mean, but what are the real differences if we're talking? Is one better than the other?
Sure. I mean, we can think of this as kind of a bit on a spectrum, between active ranging to passive. And so it really depends on how direct is the communication. And so, a passive-aggressive communication, as we spoke about, is really hidden, and it's not really clear why a person is angry, why are they upset. Whereas with active aggression, it is clear.
You know
what you've done wrong. You've been told exactly, maybe with a lot of detail, and you're in trouble and why.
Which can be harsh to hear and deal with, but at least you know where you stand.
Absolutely. And so active aggression doesn't have to mean that, someone is shouting or someone is swearing or anything like that. It really just can mean that they're expressing their feelings very directly. And I think that's a much more positive way to address issues, is to be very clear, to state, this is what happened, and to explain, this is why it made me feel this way, this is what it made me feel, and this is what I'd really like to see in the future. Very direct, but it doesn't have to be necessarily angry. But of course, when it does come with that, then that's also problematic. When it does come with shouting or anything like that.
Even active, passive, it doesn't matter, but how you kind of bring that about. I think that is the big one as well, because that also depends on how that person then on the receiving end will take it and absorb that information. We're going to be back with Thomas in just a little bit, because we want to get his tips on how to effectively deal with conflict within a family dynamic. We'll be back now. But let's get the blood flowing. It is cold.
It's my feel-good breakfast show.
Welcome back to your Feel Good Breakfast Show, Expresso, right here on S3. It is a Relationship Tuesday on your Feel Good Breakfast Show this morning, where we delve into various relationship dynamics. Now, growing up in a household where passive aggressiveness is prevalent, bad behavior can spill over onto the children, creating a kind of vicious cycle of avoiding conflict and internalized anger and also discomfort. But it doesn't have to be this way. Now, counseling psychologist Thomas Geffen, let's us get it straight this morning. Thomas, thank you very much once again for joining us. Before we continue our chat, we did get a voice note from Nirmala this morning. Let's quickly hear what she has to say, Nirmala.
Morning, Feel Good Expresso team. I love the morning discussion. Mrs. Nirmala Devi Mudli of Amkumas. I would deal with a conflict situation. Firstly, one without the other, and then bring them together and try and ask them to reapproach. How did it come to be a conflict? And through that, maybe a little bit of reverse psychology here and there, and get them to realize it instead of getting their mindset fixed that it has to be this way or no way at all. Thank you. Have a blessed day.
Thank you, Nirmala. I love her. She always comes up, and it looks like she's quite wise.
Absolutely,
Hey?
absolutely.
Separate first and deal with the issues and then bring it together.
What a helpful approach. I mean, sometimes, when people can be just spoken to, separately, then it can just relieve a little bit of the tension and, just that one person coming in and trying to understand both sides, sitting with one person, understanding what are they feeling, sitting with the other person, and then trying to just really mediate a discussion. Now we can bring both sides of that picture together, and maybe actually, there doesn't need to be that conflict or that
Exactly,
problem.
because most oftentimes, I mean, if you don't do it properly, it starts boiling, you lose perspective, and then you kind of tend to forget what is it that we're fighting about in the first place anyways.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Because then everything else comes into play as well. Back to passive aggression very quickly. Is it a personality trait, or is it something that is taught? And also, is there a root cause for it, or is there only one?
I think as it is with so many kinds of behaviors, it's so complex. So I think really we have to consider both sides of nature and nurture. And certainly with many personality traits, and we can also then say the same about passive-aggressive behavior, there are aspects of personality that one can be born with. And if you ask any mother, she might say that, oh, this baby is more of this or more of that, even in the first few months. And so there are aspects of our personality that, right from the earliest moments of our life, we do tend to have. But I think with passive-aggressive behavior, it's probably more on the side of something we learn rather than something that we're born with. But at the same time, both can play a role.
Yeah, look, I could just see it with my kids and how they absorb everything that we do and we say, mannerisms, all of those kind of things. And I think it's important for parents specifically to maybe take a step back and just look at themselves. And it takes a big person to do that, So I think just to help us recognize from a parent's point of view, what does passive aggressiveness look like from a parent perspective? Maybe there's something that, our viewers can identify with this morning to realize maybe I'm not dealing with this the right way.
Absolutely. I mean, we can look at a few examples. I mean, I think one common one with a parent, it might be agreeing to do something for a child. It might be, agreeing to let them, do a certain activity or certain, maybe it's taking them to visit friends, but it's doing it in a way that maybe is done with a really bad mood.
So they almost like feel guilty. Yeah,
yes, exactly. So I think if you are trying to maybe leave your child with a feeling of guilt, they might ask you for something, maybe it's asking for money, and, the parent says, yes, that's fine, but then later along the line, they're grumbling about it, and, they're really maybe, reminding the child in really a negative way that, things are quite tough financially, and, this is really, a very generous thing that I'm doing, and instead of, just doing something for a child, and I mean, talk to them about maybe responsible use of money, but it's really done in a way that leaves them feeling terribly guilty and feeling like maybe they shouldn't have asked, even though the parent did agree to this, and maybe next time they'll rather not ask.
You can understand why this is such a deep rooted issue? Because I mean, you say something with with a positive aspect, but there's this tone, underlying tone of that negativity, which leaves the person on the receiving end, the child in this case, feeling like, oh yes, I know that I'm allowed to, but I still feel bad for doing it. And I can understand how that can cause issues later on in life, which brings me now to, when there are these kind of conflicts, I mean, how do we go about looking at it as a family unit and resolving it properly? What does parents need to do? Do we take that step back and look at ourselves internally first to make sure that there's a healthy relationship and dealing with conflict in a healthy way?
It is so complex. And, I think one of the really key things is to take that step back, as you say, and to think about, maybe, especially as a parent who can do that, who's got that emotional maturity, to think, okay, what is going on? And a good place to start with is thinking about, okay, what am I feeling? And
where is this
coming from? And then, that step back really helps. And, maybe if they are dealing, let's say, with a passive-aggressive child, they might want to say, what am I doing to maybe make them not feel safe to express their feelings very openly? Or if they're dealing with their own passive-aggressiveness, why is it that I don't feel able to maybe talk about this more directly? But that step back really helps. And, it just allows, instead of, because often what happens is that the conflict becomes about the behavior or it becomes about something else. And the step back really helps identify what actually is the problem. What is the event or the conversation that actually made me feel a certain way or that led to kind of this tension. And if you can identify that, then you can really take some steps to
I think it's very important for families, especially within the the context of their own home, to not react immediately. If you know that things can boil over quite quickly, maybe this is an opportunity for you to say, like, hey, before I do anything, and if there's a conflict situation, just don't react immediately.
Absolutely.
Just stop quickly.
Just stop. It can really be helpful to kind of just take that deep breath and think, okay, what has just happened, and check in. Why did that happen? What am I feeling? And before reacting, just try to just pause things there, and then, you can address the issue.
Take a breath. Thomas, thank you very much. That was fascinating, and you can really understand why this can become such a complicated issue, but it's not all doom and gloom. People with passive-aggressive nature, they can change, and you just got to allow in a family unit to provide that safe space to do so. And if it's possibly you, maybe internalize it a little bit and just reflect, because at the end of the day, your family is your family. We have so little time with them, so you might as well find a way to really enjoy that time together.